Honestly, I don't understand why you insist on bringing this up now. It's completely inappropriate for dinner.
You never listen, do you? Honestly, I don't know why you even bother showing up if this is how you're gonna act.
They were laughing when my son said it. Mom wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real emergency, David muttered, barely looking up from his plate. Michelle smirked, and even my grandson Jason let out a quiet chuckle. She's always been fragile. I didn't argue. I never did. I just folded my hands tighter in my lap, pretending it didn't sting the way it always did. Then the doorbell rang. David sighed and got up, but I followed behind him, something in my chest suddenly uneasy. When the door opened, a tall man in a dark suit stood there, eyes fixed on me. "Are you Evan Thornton?" he asked. I nodded slowly. His voice softened. "I've been looking for you for 20 years. You're the woman who pulled me out of a collapsing house during Hurricane Elias." The room went completely silent. "If this story makes you feel something already, I'd really love to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you believe people can be stronger than they look, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support truly means more than you know." After that night, nothing in the house felt the same, at least not for me. But for David, Michelle, and Jason, it seemed like they were trying very hard to pretend it had never happened. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Old habits, I suppose. When you spend decades waking up before sunrise for hospital shifts, your body never really forgets. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold between my hands, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window. Evan Thornton, a name that had once meant something. Now it felt like it belonged to someone else. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Michelle walked in already dressed for work, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. She paused when she saw me. For a brief moment, there was something unfamiliar in her eyes, uncertainty, maybe even discomfort, but it vanished just as quickly. "You're up early," she said, opening the fridge. "I couldn't sleep," I replied quietly. She nodded, not really listening. "David has a meeting this morning. Don't forget to pick Jason up from school later." There it was. Back to normal. Or at least back to what they considered normal. "Michelle?" I said, surprising even myself. She turned, one eyebrow raised. "That man last night, Daniel, he wasn't lying." She let out a small, almost polite laugh. "Evan, people say all kinds of things. Maybe he got confused. It was 20 years ago. I remember," I said softly. That made her pause. For just a second, then she closed the fridge a little harder than necessary. "Well, I'm sure it meant a lot to him, but let's not make it into something bigger than it is. Something bigger than it is." I watched her walk out, her words echoing in the quiet kitchen. To her, it was just a strange coincidence. To me, it was a life I had buried. David came down a few minutes later, adjusting his tie, his phone already pressed to his ear. He barely glanced at me as he poured himself coffee. "Yeah, I'll be there in 20, he said into the phone. "Just send me the numbers." He ended the call and finally looked at me. "Mom?" He said, his tone casual, almost too casual. "About last night, I waited." He scratched the back of his neck. "It was unexpected." "Yes," I said. He nodded. "But you don't have to let it get to your head, okay? People exaggerate things all the time." There it was again. That quiet dismissal. Not cruel, not loud, but heavy enough to settle into my chest. "I'm not exaggerating," I said. David sighed, already losing patience. I'm just saying, you don't need to prove anything. You're fine the way you are. Fine. The word stung more than it should have, because fine wasn't a compliment. It was a boundary, a way of keeping me exactly where they had always placed me. Small, harmless, forgettable. Before I could respond, Jason ran into the kitchen backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad, can you sign this?" he asked, shoving a paper into David's hand. David scribbled his name without reading it. Jason glanced at me. For a moment, I saw something different in his expression. Curiosity, maybe even confusion. "Grandma," he said slowly, "did you really save someone in a hurricane?" The question hung in the air. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I say? Yes, I had. But I had also spent 20 years pretending it didn't matter. David cut in before I could answer. "It's complicated, buddy." "Don't worry about it." Jason frowned. But the guy said, but I had also spent 20 years pretending it didn't matter. David cut in before I could answer. "It's complicated, buddy. Don't worry about it." Jason frowned. But the guy said Jason Michelle called from the hallway were going to be late. He hesitated, looking between me and his father, then shrugged and ran out. The door slammed a moment later. And just like that, the conversation was over. I sat there for a long time after they left, the silence pressing in around me. It wasn't new, this feeling. Being overlooked. Being underestimated. Being invisible. What was new was the way it unsettled me now. Because for the first time in years, someone had seen me. Not as David's mother. Not as Michelle's responsibility. Not as Jason's quiet, aging grandmother. But as someone who had once mattered. Someone who had done something that changed a life. I closed my eyes, and before I could stop it, the memory came rushing back. The wind, the rain, the sound of something collapsing in the distance. I shook my head, pushing it away. Not yet. I wasn't ready to go back there. Instead, I stood up and began clearing the kitchen, moving slowly, methodically. Dishes, countertops, the small routines that had become my way of staying grounded. But even as I worked, my mind kept drifting. To Daniel's face, the way his voice had softened when he spoke to me, the certainty in his eyes. He hadn't doubted me, not for a second. Around noon, there was another knock at the door. My heart skipped. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the door, as if it might disappear if I looked away. Then I walked over and opened it. It wasn't Daniel, just the mail carrier. I let out a quiet breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Of course. Why would he come back? People like him didn't linger in places like this. They said what they needed to say, then returned to their real lives. Still, as I closed the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That the life I had carefully kept small and quiet was beginning to crack open. Later that afternoon, I picked Jason up from school. He climbed into the car quieter than usual. "Grandma," he said after a few minutes. "Yes, Dad said you used to be a nurse." "I did," I said. "Why did you stop?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. How do you explain a lifetime of choices to a child? "I needed to be here," I said finally. "For Dad." "Yes." He nodded slowly, processing that. "Did you like it?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "I loved it." He was quiet again. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "I think it's cool." I glanced at him, surprised. "What is that you helped people?" Something inside my chest loosened just a little. "Thank you," I said. When we got home, Michelle was already there, pacing the living room with her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what he said," she was saying, her voice tight. We're not getting involved in this. She stopped when she saw me. In this. She stopped when she saw me. Her expression shifted instantly. Controlled, polite. Jason, go upstairs and start your homework, she said. He hesitated, then went. Michelle ended the call and turned to me. Hat man, she said. Daniel, he called. Her expression shifted instantly. Controlled, polite. Jason, go upstairs and start your homework, she said. He hesitated, then went. Michelle ended the call and turned to me. That man, she said. Daniel, he called. My heart skipped again. Oh, he wants to come by tonight, she continued, to talk. I nodded slowly, and I asked. She crossed her arms. I told him we'd think about it. Of course she had, because in this house, decisions were never really mine. But this time, something felt different. I met her gaze. I'd like him to come, I said. Michelle blinked clearly, not expecting that, for what she asked. To talk? I replied, like he asked. She studied me for a moment as if seeing me in a slightly different light. Not weaker, not stronger, just different. I'll tell David, she said finally. As she walked away, I remained standing in the living room, my hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. Because whether my family believed it or not, the truth was already on its way back into this house. And this time, I wasn't sure I wanted to hide from it anymore. That night, after Michelle told me Daniel wanted to come back, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because something inside me had been stirred awake, and once something like that wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep easily. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The same walls that had held years of silence suddenly felt too small, too heavy, with everything I had never said. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped trying to push the memories away. They came slowly at first, like distant thunder. Then, all at once, 20 years ago, Florida, Hurricane Elias. I could still feel it. The air that day had been thick, heavy, in a way that made your lungs work harder just to breathe. The sky had turned that strange gray-green color that only ever meant one thing in Florida: something bad was coming. Very bad. I had been working double shifts at the local hospital for days already. We all had. Hurricanes didn't just arrive in a moment. They built themselves up, warning you, giving you time to prepare, and yet never quite enough time. The hospital was overflowing before the storm even made landfall. People with injuries from evacuations. Elderly patients who had nowhere else to go. Families clinging to whatever sense of safety they could find. I remember tying my hair back with shaking hands, pulling on another pair of gloves, and telling myself the same thing I always did. Just keep moving. Just help the next person. That was enough, until it wasn't. When the storm finally hit, it felt like the world itself was breaking apart. The windows rattled violently, the lights flickered, and then darkness. Complete and sudden. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, but even then, the building seemed to tremble under the force of the wind. Outside, it sounded like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Inside, it was chaos. Doctors shouting orders, patients crying, machines beeping then failing, then coming back to life in uneven rhythms. I had seen difficult days before, long nights, hard cases, but nothing like that. Nothing that felt so completely out of control. And yet that wasn't what stayed with me the most. It was the moment everything changed. It must have been close to midnight when the call came in. Not through official channels, not from emergency services. Just a desperate voice on a failing line. "There's someone trapped," the voice had said. "House collapsed. He's still alive. Please." Then the line went dead. We all froze, because we knew what that meant. The area they were calling from had already been marked as unsafe. Flooded roads, downed power lines, structures collapsing one after another. No rescue teams were being sent there. Not until the storm passed. Write it down. The area they were calling from had already been marked as unsafe. Flooded roads, downed power lines, structures collapsing one after another. No rescue teams were being sent there. Not until the storm passed. "Write it down," one of the doctors said quietly. "We'll check it later." Later. That word, it echoed in my mind even now. Later meant hours, maybe longer. And in a situation like that, later often meant too late. I remember standing there, the pen still in my hand, staring at the half-written address on the paper. Something inside me refused to move on. "Evan," one of the nurses called. "We need you in room 3. I didn't answer. "Evan?" I looked up, meeting her eyes. "There's someone out there," I said. Her expression tightened. "There are a lot of people out there." "No," I said, my voice quieter, but steadier. "This one, he's still alive." She shook her head. "We can't go out there. You know that." I did know. Every part of my training, every protocol, every rule drilled into me over the years told me the same thing. Stay inside. Stay safe. Help the people you can reach. But there's something they don't teach you in training. What it feels like to know someone is dying, and that you could reach them. If you just tried. "I'll be quick," I said. "Evan, I'll be careful." "You could get yourself killed." The words hung between us. And for a moment, I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of dying, but because I knew what would happen if I didn't come back. David was still young then. Too young to understand. Too young to lose the only parent he had left. That thought should have been enough to stop me. It should have rooted me to the floor, forced me to stay where it was safe, where it was expected. But instead, it did something else. It reminded me of what kind of person I wanted him to grow up believing his mother was. Not perfect, not fearless, but someone who didn't turn away when it mattered. I set the pen down. "I have to go," I said. No one tried to stop me after that. Maybe they knew it wouldn't work, or maybe they understood. The moment I stepped outside, the storm hit me like a wall. The wind was so strong, it felt like it was trying to push me back into the building. Rain lashed against my face, sharp and relentless, soaking through my clothes in seconds. Visibility was almost nothing. Just shadows and movement and the constant roar of the hurricane tearing through everything in its path. I gripped the address in my hand, reading it again under the flickering light from the hospital entrance. It wasn't far. A few blocks at most. On a normal day, it would have been a 5-minute walk. That night, it felt like crossing another world. Water rushed along the streets, rising past my ankles, then my knees as I moved forward. Debris floated past pieces of wood, broken glass, things I didn't want to look too closely at. Every step was uncertain. Every sound made my heart jump. A crack in the distance, a crash somewhere nearby. The storm didn't just surround you. It pressed into you, filled your ears, your lungs, your thoughts, until there was nothing else. And yet I kept going, because somewhere ahead there was a man I had never met, a man whose voice I had never heard, a man who was still breathing, for now. I turned onto the street from the address, or what used to be a street. Half the houses were already damaged, some completely gone, reduced to piles of debris that barely resembled homes anymore. And then I saw it, the collapsed structure, the remains of what had once been a house, now broken open like it had been crushed by something enormous. My heart pounded. This was it. This was where he was. If he was still alive at all. For a brief moment, I stood there, the storm raging around me, staring at the wreckage. And I remember thinking, this is the point where you turn back. This is where you admit it's too dangerous, too late, too much. But then I heard something, faint, almost swallowed by the wind. A sound. Not the storm, not debris. Something human. A weak, broken attempt at a voice. And that was all it took. I stepped forward, into the wreckage, into the unknown, because whatever happened next, there was no turning back anymore. The first step onto the wreckage nearly took me down. The ground beneath my feet wasn't solid. It shifted unstable, a mix of broken wood, shattered glass, and soaked debris that slid under my weight. I grabbed onto what used to be part of a doorway to steady myself, my heart pounding louder than the storm for a moment. "Hello?" I shouted, though my voice was immediately swallowed by the wind. No answer. Just the howl of the hurricane pressing in from all directions. I moved forward, carefully testing each step before putting my full weight down. The house had collapsed inward, the roof partially caved in, leaving jagged beams leaning at unnatural angles. Rain poured through every opening, turning everything slick and dangerous. "Can you hear me?" I called again. For a second, I thought I imagined it. A faint sound, barely there. A strained breath, or maybe a whisper. I froze. There it was again. Help! It was weak, broken, but unmistakably human. "I'm here!" I shouted, my voice sharper now, urgency cutting through the storm. "Don't move if you can hear me." I moved toward the sound, climbing over debris, ducking under splintered beams. Every instinct screamed at me to be careful, Owen. Wrong shift one loose support, and the rest of the structure could come down on top of us. But there wasn't time for perfect decisions. Only necessary ones. I found him near what used to be the center of the house. Pinned. Half his body was trapped under a collapsed section of ceiling. A heavy beam lay across his legs, and chunks of drywall and wood pressed down around him. His face was pale beneath the rain, and dirt eyes barely open. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us. "You're okay," I said, dropping to my knees beside him, though I knew that wasn't entirely true. "I've got you." His lips moved, but no sound came out. I leaned closer. "Stay with me," I said. "You're not alone anymore." My hands moved automatically, years of training taking over. Check airway, check breathing, pulse weak, but there. Blood. Too much of it. There was a deep wound along his side, partially hidden by debris, and his left leg was twisted at an angle that made my stomach tighten. "Okay," I whispered more to myself than to him. "Okay, we can work with this. The beam. That was the first problem. I tried to lift it. It didn't move. Of course it didn't. Waterlogged wood, structural weight. It might as well have been part of the ground itself." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. panic wouldn't help him, and it wouldn't help me. "Hey," I said, tapping his cheek lightly. "Stay with me. What's your name?" His eyes flickered. "Daniel," he managed, barely audible. "Daniel." "Okay, Daniel," I said, anchoring him, and myself, to something real. "I'm Evan. I'm going to get you out of here." His gaze drifted unfocused, but I saw the faintest trace of something there. Hope. Or maybe just trust. Either way, it was enough. I looked around quickly, scanning the wreckage. There had to be something I could use. Leverage, support, anything. A broken piece of furniture caught my eye. A long, sturdy board that had once been part of a table. I crawled over, dragging it back through the debris, my hands slipping as rain poured down harder. The wind shifted suddenly, a violent gust that made the entire structure groan. I froze, listening. Wood creaked above us. Something shifted. Not good. Not good at all. "Hurry," I muttered under my breath. I wedged the board under the beam, positioning it carefully. If I could create enough leverage, maybe, just maybe, I could lift it enough to pull him free. But there was a risk. If I moved the wrong piece, the rest could collapse. I looked at Daniel. His eyes were half closed now, his breathing shallow. There wasn't time to hesitate. "Daniel," I said firmly, forcing my voice to cut through the chaos. "I need you to stay awake. Can you do that for me?" A faint nod. "Good," I said. "On my count, I'm going to move this beam. It's going to hurt, a lot. But you have to stay with me. Do you understand?" Another small nod. I took a deep breath, planting my feet as firmly as I could. "Okay," I whispered. 1, 2, 3. I pushed down on the board. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a shift. The beam lifted just barely. Enough. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Daniel under his shoulders and pulled. He cried out a raw, broken sound that cut straight through me, but I didn't stop. Not until his legs were free. The beam dropped back down with a heavy crash the moment I released the pressure. The sound echoed unnaturally in the storm, and for a second, everything went still. Then the house groaned again, louder this time. We didn't have long. "Stay with me," I said quickly, dragging him away from the immediate collapse zone. Every movement was a struggle. He was heavier than he looked, and the ground fought me at every step. Water rushed past us, rising higher now. I could feel the current pulling. We needed to move. Now. I propped him against what remained of a wall and dropped beside him, my hands moving quickly again. I tore a strip from my sleeve, pressing it against the wound on his side to slow the bleeding. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Look at me." His eyes fluttered open. "That's it," I said. "Stay right here with me." His lips moved again. Why he whispered. Why I almost laughed. Because there was no simple answer to that. Because sometimes you just don't leave someone behind. Because you're still here, I said, softly. And that's enough. Another violent gust tore through the structure, and this time something gave way behind us. A loud crack. Then a section of the roof collapsed completely where we had been just moments before. I felt the vibration through the ground. If I had been slower, I pushed the thought away. We were still alive. That was what mattered. But we couldn't stay here. The storm wasn't letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. I looked out toward the street, if it could still be called that. Water surged through it now, carrying debris rising inch by inch. The hospital. It wasn't far, but in these conditions, it might as well have been miles. I looked back at Daniel. His breathing was shallow again, his head sagging. No, not yet. You don't get to give up now? I said firmly, lifting his chin so he had to look at me. You hear me? His eyes struggled to focus. Stay with me, I repeated. I didn't come all this way to lose you. I shifted my grip, pulling one of his arms over my shoulder. The weight hit me immediately. Heavy, unsteady, but manageable. It had to be. Okay, I whispered, bracing myself. We're getting out of here. The storm roared in response, as if daring me to try, and maybe it should have scared me. Maybe I should have looked at the flooding streets, the collapsing buildings, the impossible distance ahead, and turned back. But I didn't, because in that moment it wasn't about fear. It wasn't about danger. It was about one simple truth: he was alive, and as long as he was still breathing, I wasn't leaving him behind. The moment I pulled Daniel onto my shoulder, I knew this was going to be harder than anything I had ever done. He wasn't just heavy, he was unstable. His weight shifted unpredictably with every step, his body barely conscious, offering no help to balance himself. Every movement sent pain through him, and every sound he made cut through the storm like a warning I couldn't ignore. But stopping wasn't an option. Stay with me, I said again, though I wasn't sure if he could still hear me. I adjusted my grip, tightening my arm around his waist, trying to keep him from slipping. His blood was warm against my side, mixing with the cold rain that soaked through both of us. One step, then another. The street, or what remained of it, was worse than I remembered. The water had risen higher now, pushing hard against my legs, resisting every movement forward. It was no longer just something to walk through. It was something fighting me. Debris slammed into my legs, branches, pieces of broken furniture, things I didn't want to identify. Each impact threatened to key into identify. Each impact threatened to knock me off balance. If I fell, we both might not get back up. Evan. The voice was faint, barely there, but it was enough to make me stop for half a second. I'm here, knock me off balance. If I fell, we both might not get back up. Evan. The voice was faint, barely there, but it was enough to make me stop for half a second. I'm here, I said quickly, turning my head slightly so he could hear me over the storm. You're doing good. Just stay with me. Cold, he whispered. I swallowed hard. Of course he was. Shock was setting in. His body was losing blood, losing heat, losing the fight. No, I said firmly, even as my own teeth began to chatter. You're not cold. You're just tired. That's all. A lie. But sometimes lies are what keep people alive long enough to reach the truth. I forced myself forward again. Each step took everything I had. My muscles burned. My lungs felt tight. The wind pushed against me so hard, it felt like it was trying to peel me backward, drag us both into the darkness behind us. But I kept going, because stopping meant losing, and I wasn't going to lose him. Not after everything it had taken to get him out of that house. The hospital lights flickered faintly in the distance. So close, and yet still so far. A sudden surge of water hit us from the side, stronger than anything before it. I stumbled. My foot slipped on something beneath the surface, maybe a piece of metal, maybe broken glass, and for a terrifying second, my balance was gone. Daniel's weight shifted sharply. We were going down. No! I twisted, dropping to one knee instead of falling completely, using my body to shield him from hitting the water. Pain shot up through my leg, but I barely registered it. All I could think was, don't let him go. I tightened my grip, breathing hard. Okay, I whispered more to myself than to him. Okay, we're okay. The storm didn't care. Another gust slammed into us, sending water splashing into my face, blinding me for a moment. I wiped my eyes quickly, forcing myself to focus. One step at a time. That was all I needed. Not the whole distance, not the entire impossible path ahead, just the next step. And then the next. Talk to me, I said suddenly, my voice strained but steady. Daniel, I need you to keep talking. There was a long pause. I thought maybe he had slipped too far. Then can't. You can? I said immediately. You don't have to say much, just anything. Tell me what you do. Another pause. Construction, he murmured. Of course. I almost smiled despite everything. You picked the wrong night to be at work, I said, trying to keep my voice light. A faint sound came from him. Not quite a laugh, but close enough. Good. He was still there. See, I said. You're doing fine. The hospital was closer now. I could see the entrance lights clearly flickering but still standing against the storm. People moved inside shadows, rushing back and forth. Safety. Almost. Hey, I said, my voice tightening as relief and urgency tangled together. We're almost there. You hear me? You're going to make it. His head shifted slightly against my shoulder. You came? The words were so soft, I almost missed them. I told you, I said. I wasn't leaving you. Something in his grip tightened weakly, his fingers barely brushing against my arm. And in that moment, I felt it. That fragile, invisible thread between two strangers. Trust. He had nothing left. No strength, no control, no certainty. Except for one thing. Me. And I couldn't break that. Not now. Not when we were this close. The final stretch felt like the longest. The water was deepest here, nearly to my waist, forcing me to fight for every inch forward. My legs shook with exhaustion, my arms burning from holding his weight. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going, but I didn't need longer. I just needed enough. Help! I shouted, my voice cracking as I pushed forward. I need help! At first, there was no response. The storm swallowed my words like it had everything else. But then movement. Someone turned. Another figure followed. And suddenly, there were people running toward us, hands reaching, voices shouting. I've got him, someone yelled. Get a stretcher. Careful! He's losing blood. The weight was lifted from me as they took Daniel from my arms. For a moment, I just stood there frozen. Empty. Like something had been holding me up all this time, and now that it was gone, I didn't know how to stand on my own. Ma'am, are you okay? Someone asked, grabbing my arm to steady me. I nodded automatically, though I wasn't sure if it was true. I'm fine, I said, my voice barely audible. They were already moving Daniel inside, rushing him through the doors. I watched as they disappeared into the bright, flickering light of the hospital. Safe. He was safe. That was all that mattered. My legs gave out before I even realized what was happening. The world tilted, voices blurred, hands caught me before I hit the ground, and as everything faded into a distant hum, one thought stayed clear in my mind. He made it. That was enough. It had to be. When I woke up, everything was quiet. Too quiet. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The storm was gone. The roar, the wind, the endless pounding of rain. All of it replaced by a steady, distant hum. Then I noticed the light. Soft, artificial. Steady, hospital light. I blinked slowly, my body heavy, every muscle aching, as if it had been stretched too far and left that way. The faint smell of antiseptic filled the air, grounding me in a reality that felt almost unreal after everything that had happened. "You're awake." The voice came from my right. I turned my head slowly and saw one of the nurses standing beside the bed, her expression a mix of relief and quiet admiration. "You gave us quite a scare," she said gently. My throat felt dry. How long?" "Almost 12 hours," she replied. "You collapsed from exhaustion and mild hypothermia. Nothing permanent, but you pushed yourself too far." 12 hours. The number felt strange in my mind, like time had stretched and folded in ways I couldn't quite understand. "Daniel," I said, suddenly, the name rushing back before anything else. "The man I brought in, where is he?" The nurse smiled faintly. "He's alive," she said. "Stable. You got him here just in time." Just in time. The words settled into my chest, warm and steady. Alive. That was all that mattered. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that truth sink in. I had done it. We had made it. "You should rest," the nurse added softly. "You've earned it." But rest wasn't what I felt. Not really. What I felt was emptiness. Not in a bad way, just a space where something intense had been. Adrenaline, fear, purpose. And now that it was gone, there was nothing left but the quiet aftermath. "Can I see him?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not yet. He's still under observation." "But I'm sure he'll want to see you when he's stronger." I nodded slowly. Of course. That made sense. The nurse adjusted the blanket around me, then left the room, her footsteps fading into the hallway. And just like that, I was alone again. I stared at the ceiling, the events of the night replaying in fragments. The call, the decision, the storm, the house. Daniel's voice, the weight of him on my shoulder. The moment the hospital doors opened. It all felt distant now, like something I had watched happen rather than something I had lived through. Maybe that was my mind's way of protecting me. Or maybe it was because I already knew what came next. Nothing. No headlines, no recognition, no one asking questions. Because that wasn't why I had done it. I had learned that lesson a long time ago. You don't save someone because someone is watching. You do it because you can't live with yourself if you don't. A soft knock on the door pulled me back to the present. "Come in," I said, my voice still weak. A doctor stepped inside, flipping through a chart as he approached. "Evan Thornton," he said, glancing up at me. "You're lucky." I gave a small, tired smile. "That makes two of us." He nodded as if he understood more than I had said. "You're going to be fine," he continued. "But you need to take it easy. Your body's been through a lot." "I will," I said, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. He studied me for a moment, then asked, "You're the one who brought in Daniel Brooks, correct?" "Yes." His expression shifted slightly. "Respect. Not exaggerated, not dramatic, just real. He wouldn't have made it otherwise," the doctor said simply. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. After a few more instructions, he left, and the room fell quiet again. Hours passed. Or maybe it was less. Time didn't move the same way in places like that. Eventually, they helped me sit up, then stand. My legs trembled under me at first, but they held. By the time evening came, I was walking slowly down the hallway, guided by one of the nurses. "Just for a few minutes," she said. "You still need rest?" I nodded, but I already knew where I was going. Room 214. I had seen it on the chart when the doctor walked in. Daniel Brooks. The door was slightly open. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the frame. Then I stepped inside. He looked different, cleaner, stabilized. Machines surrounded him, monitoring his vitals, steady beeping filling the room. But he was alive. That was the first thing I noticed, and the most important. His eyes opened slowly as I stepped closer. For a second, he looked confused. Then recognition hit. "You," he whispered. I gave a small smile. "Hi." He stared at me like I wasn't entirely real. "You stayed," he said. I shook my head gently. "No, I just made sure you got here." He swallowed his throat, moving with effort. I thought he began, then stopped, as if the memory was too heavy to carry all at once. "I know," I said softly. "Me too." There was a long silence between us. Not awkward, not empty, just full of everything that didn't need to be said. Finally, he spoke again. Why, he asked. The same question. But this time, it sounded different. Less confused. More searching. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who had been nothing more than a voice on a broken line just hours ago. At the life that had almost ended, and then hadn't. "Because you were there," I said quietly. "And I could reach you." He blinked as if trying to process that. As if it wasn't enough. But for me, it was everything. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said. "You don't have to," I replied, and I meant it, because gratitude wasn't what I had been looking for. It never had been. He studied me as if trying to understand something deeper. Something I wasn't sure could be explained. "Still," he said, his voice firmer now despite the weakness. "I won't forget this." I nodded. That was enough. More than enough. I stayed for a few minutes longer, then left quietly, letting him rest. As I walked back down the hallway, something settled inside me. A calm. A certainty. The storm was over. The noise, the chaos, the danger, it had all passed. And in its place, there was something quieter. Something stronger. Not recognition. Not pride. Just truth. I had done what I needed to do, and that was enough. So when I was discharged the next day, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not David. Not Michelle. Not anyone. I went back to my life. Back to the quiet routines. Back to being the person they believed I was. Because some stories aren't meant to be told. Not right away. And not by the person who lived them. I didn't tell them. Not when I got home the next day. Not when David opened the door, barely glancing at me before stepping aside so I could walk in. Not when Michelle asked in that polite but distant tone if everything had been handled. Handled, as if what had happened could be folded neatly into a word like that. "I'm fine," I said simply, and that was enough for them. It always had been. Life moved on quickly in our house, faster than it should sometimes, as if slowing down meant risking something uncomfortable, something honest. David went back to work. Michelle went back to her routines. Jason went back to school. And I went back to being invisible. At least that's what I thought. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. It started small. The way I stood a little straighter when I walked into a room. The way my voice didn't disappear quite as easily when I spoke. The way I caught myself remembering not pushing it away, not burying it, but actually remembering what I had done. Who I had been. who I still was. That alone felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable even, because for so long I had learned to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. It had been simpler that way, safer, or at least I thought it was. Mom. David's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up from the kitchen sink, my hands still submerged in warm water. Yes. He leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. There was something hesitant in his posture, something I hadn't seen before. That guy, he said, Daniel. I felt my chest tighten slightly. What about him? He called again. Of course he did. I dried my hands slowly, turning to face him fully, and David shrugged, but it wasn't his usual careless gesture. He wants to come by, talk, in person. I nodded. He already said that. Yeah, but... David hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if it's a good idea. There it was. The resistance. Not aggressive, not outright denial, but something quieter, more complicated. Why not? I asked. He shifted his weight. It's just a lot, Mom. He's saying things that... He stopped himself, exhaling. I don't know what he wants. I think he wants to thank me, I said. David let out a small, almost disbelieving laugh. For something that happened 20 years ago? Yes. He shook his head. People don't just show up like that, Mom. Not unless there's something else. Something else. I studied him carefully. This wasn't about Daniel. Not really. This was about control. About a version of reality that David had built over the years, one where I was predictable, simple, easy to understand. And Daniel didn't fit into that. Maybe, I said calmly, or maybe he just remembers something you don't. That landed. I saw it in the way his expression tightened just slightly. That's not fair, he said. Isn't it? The words came out softer than I expected, but they carried more weight than I had intended. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then David sighed. Look, he said, his voice lowering. I'm not saying you didn't help someone. I'm just saying maybe he's exaggerating. You know how people are with these stories? Stories. That's what it was to him. A story. Something flexible. Something that could be shaped to fit what he already believed. I remember it clearly, I said. David met my eyes, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Then why didn't you ever tell us? He asked. The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't have an answer, but because no one had ever asked it before. I considered my response carefully. Would you have believed me? I asked. He didn't answer right away, and that silence, it said everything. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. David looked down, his jaw tightening. I just don't want things to get weird, he muttered. Weird? I almost smiled, because what he meant was different, uncomfortable, unfamiliar. I think they already are, I said gently. Before he could respond, Michelle walked into the room, her phone in hand. He's coming tonight, she said, not even looking up. 7 o'clock. David turned sharply. You already told him yes. She shrugged. He wasn't taking no for an answer. And honestly, I'm curious. Curious? That was new. What about you? She added, finally looking at me. You okay with this? The question was casual, almost careless, but it was still a question, directed at me. Not about me, At me. Yes, I said. Michelle studied me for a second, as if reassessing something she hadn't paid attention to before. All right then, she said. Well, see what he has to say. She turned and walked out, already dialing another number. David lingered for a moment longer. 7, he said quietly. I nodded. When he left, I remained in the kitchen, my hands resting on the counter. 7 o'clock, just a few hours away. The truth. Walking back into this house, not as a memory, not as something I could hide, but as something real, something undeniable. I should have been nervous, maybe even afraid. But instead, I felt something else, something steady, something strong. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I already knew who I was, and whether they were ready or not, they were about to find out too. 7 o'clock came slower than I expected, not because time dragged, but because every minute carried weight. I could feel it in the house. A tension that didn't belong to me, but to everyone else. Michelle cleaned more than necessary, wiping down surfaces that were already spotless. David checked his watch too often, pacing between the living room and the kitchen like he was preparing for something he couldn't quite define. Even Jason noticed. Is something happening? He asked, at one point, glancing between his parents. Just a guest coming over? Michelle said quickly, but her tone was too sharp, too controlled. Jason looked at me instead. I gave him a small, reassuring smile. Someone I used to know, I said. That wasn't entirely accurate, but it wasn't entirely wrong either, because what Daniel and I shared wasn't based on years or conversations. It was something else, something forged in a moment where nothing else mattered but survival. And that kind of connection, it doesn't fade. It waits. The doorbell rang exactly at 7. No hesitation, no delay. Just one clear, deliberate sound. Everything in the house went still. David looked at Michelle. Michelle looked at David. Neither of them moved. So I did. I walked to the door, slowly aware of their eyes on me, aware of the silence stretching behind me, like something fragile that might break at any second. My hand rested on the handle for just a moment. Then I opened it. Daniel Brooks stood there, different from the night I first saw him in this house. Cleaner, stronger, but still carrying something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Recognition, gratitude, and something deeper. Respect. Evan, he said softly. I nodded. Daniel. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he stepped forward, extending his hand, but halfway through, he hesitated, as if unsure whether that was enough. It wasn't. I reached out and gently took his hand anyway. You look better, I said. He let out a small breath. That's because of you. Behind me, I could feel David and Michelle watching closely, measuring, trying to understand something they hadn't believed was real. Come in, I said, stepping aside. Daniel entered slowly, his gaze moving through the house, not with judgment, but with quiet awareness. Like he understood what kind of place this was, not just physically, emotionally. This is my son David, I said, turning slightly, and his wife Michelle. Daniel nodded politely. Thank you for having me. David crossed his arms, giving a short nod. Yeah. Michelle smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. There was an awkward pause, the kind that fills a room when no one knows which version of the truth they're about to hear. Please sit, I said. We moved into the living room. Daniel sat carefully still, recovering, though he tried not to show it. David remained standing for a moment before finally sitting across from him, his posture stiff. Michelle perched on the edge of a chair, her attention sharp and focused. Jason hovered near the doorway, pretending not to listen. Daniel took a breath. "I know this is unusual," he began. "Showing up like this after so many years." No one responded, so he continued. "But I've spent a long time trying to find her," he said, glancing at me. "Evan." That got their attention. David leaned forward slightly. "Why?" Simple question, but heavy. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Because I wouldn't be here without her." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that presses in. That night, he continued, his voice steady, but quiet. Hurricane Elias, my house, collapsed. I was trapped for hours. No one could reach me. No one was coming. I felt it again. The memory. The storm. The weight. "She did," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "She walked into that storm when no one else would." Michelle shifted slightly. David frowned. "That's a pretty big claim," David said carefully. Daniel nodded. "It is." Then he leaned forward. "And it's true." The room felt smaller, tighter. David shook his head slightly. "Look, I'm not saying you're lying, but I don't expect you to believe me," Daniel interrupted calmly. That surprised him. "You don't?" David asked. "No," Daniel said. "Because I didn't believe it myself at first." That caught everyone off guard. "What do you mean?" Michelle asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I was barely conscious when she found me," he said. "I remember thinking, this can't be real, that I was imagining it, that no one would risk their life like that for a stranger." His gaze shifted again, back to me. "But she did." Something in his voice made the room go completely still. No doubt, no hesitation, just certainty. "And when I woke up in the hospital," he continued, "they told me someone had brought me in. A woman. But there was no record of her staying, no name connected to the report." David glanced at me. I didn't look away. "I spent years trying to figure out who she was," Daniel said. "But storms don't leave clean records. Things get lost. People move on." He paused. "But I didn't." The words hung there, heavy, persistent. "I built my life after that night," he said. "Every decision I made, every step forward, it was because I had been given a second chance." Michelle's expression shifted slightly. Not fully, but enough. And I always knew Daniel added that I owed that chance to someone. Someone. Not just a story, not just an idea. A real person, sitting right there. Finally, David spoke again. Quieter this time. "You're saying my mom did all that?" Daniel met his gaze directly. "Yes." The answer was simple, but it carried more weight than anything else that had been said. David leaned back slowly, his arms uncrossing without him even noticing. For the first time, he didn't look at me like he already knew who I was. He looked at me like he wasn't sure anymore. And that was the beginning. Not of something dramatic, not of some instant transformation, but of something far more important. A crack. In the version of me they had always believed. And once a crack forms, it doesn't stay small for long. The room didn't move, but everything inside it did. Not physically, emotionally. You could feel it shifting slowly, like something buried for years was finally pushing its way to the surface. David didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, looking at Daniel, then at me. then back at Daniel again, like he was trying to match two versions of reality that refused to fit together. "You're serious," he said finally. It wasn't really a question. Daniel didn't flinch. "I am." Michelle leaned forward slightly, her fingers intertwined tightly in her lap. "But there has to be something else," she said. "I mean, people don't just disappear after something like that. If she really did what you're saying—" Her voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Why didn't anyone know? Why didn't it matter before? Why now? Daniel nodded slowly, as if he had expected that question. "I asked myself the same thing," he said, "for years." He glanced at me again, then back at them. "And the answer I came to wasn't complicated," he added. David frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned back a little, his expression thoughtful. "She didn't stay because she wasn't doing it for recognition," he said. The words were simple, but they landed heavily. Michelle shifted again, clearly unsettled. "That's not how people work," she said quietly. Daniel gave a faint smile. "Some people do." The silence returned, but this time it felt different, less defensive, more uncertain. David rubbed his face with one hand, exhaling slowly. He started, then stopped. He looked at me again. Really looked. Not past me. Not through me. At me. "You never told me," he said. His voice wasn't accusatory this time. It was something else, something closer to confusion, or maybe regret. "I didn't think it would matter," I said honestly. That hit harder than anything Daniel had said. I saw it in the way David's posture shifted, the way his shoulders dropped just slightly. "It matters," he said quietly. The room went still again, because this wasn't about the storm anymore. It wasn't even about Daniel. It was about everything that had come before this moment. All the years, all the assumptions, all the things left unsaid. Jason stepped a little closer from the doorway, unable to stay out of it any longer. "Wait," he said, looking between all of us. "Grandma went into a hurricane and saved someone." The simplicity of his question broke something in the room. Because to him, it wasn't complicated. It wasn't layered with years of misunderstanding or expectations. It was just, "What happened?" "Yes," Daniel said. Jason's eyes widened slightly as he looked at me. "That's kind of amazing," he said. "Kind of." I couldn't help the small smile that formed on my lips. "Thank you," I said softly. David let out a breath, shaking his head. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. But he didn't let it go this time. "No," he said, sitting up straighter. "I do." That surprised me. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I've been wrong about you." The words hung there, heavy, uncomfortable, honest. Michelle glanced at him quickly, clearly not expecting that. "David." "No," he said, cutting her off gently. "I need to say this." He looked back at me, his eyes steady now. "I've always thought I understood you," he continued. "That you were quiet, careful, not the kind of person who would do something like that. Something like that. Risk everything. Step into danger. Make impossible choices. I put you in a box," he admitted, "and I never questioned it." I didn't interrupt, because for once, he wasn't speaking over me. He was speaking to me. "And now," he added, his voice softer, "I don't know how I missed it." I took a slow breath. Because the truth was, he didn't miss it. He just never looked. You saw what you expected to see, I said gently. He nodded, accepting that. Yeah, he said. I did. Michelle shifted again, her expression more guarded now. But this doesn't change everything, she said carefully. David turned to her. It kind of does. She shook her head. No, it doesn't. One moment, no matter how big, doesn't define a person. Daniel spoke before I could. It wasn't just one moment, he said calmly. Michelle frowned. How would you know? Because people don't suddenly become that person in a crisis, Daniel replied. They already are that person. That landed. Hard. Michelle didn't respond, because there wasn't an easy way to argue with that. David looked between us again, something shifting behind his eyes. Is that true? He asked me quietly. The question was different this time. Not skeptical, not defensive, just open. I thought about it. Not just the storm, but everything before it. All the small choices, all the quiet moments, all the times I had stepped in, helped, stayed, endured without anyone noticing. Yes, I said. And for the first time, I didn't soften it. I didn't downplay it. I didn't make it smaller to make anyone else more comfortable. I've always been that person, I added. The room absorbed that slowly, like a truth that had been waiting a long time to be heard. David nodded once, then again, as if something inside him was finally settling into place. I believe you, he said. 3 simple words, but they carried years behind them. Years of doubt, of dismissal, of silence. And just like that, they started to break. Michelle looked away, clearly struggling with something she wasn't ready to say out loud. Jason, on the other hand, stepped fully into the room, now looking at me with something new in his expression. Not confusion, not distance. Respect. That's really cool. Jason, on the other hand, stepped fully into the room, now looking at me with something new in his expression. Not confusion, not new in his expression. Not confusion, not distance. Respect. That's really cool, he said. I smiled again, a little wider this time. Thank you, I repeated. Daniel leaned back slightly, watching all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not ownership, just distance. Respect. That's really cool, he said. I smiled again, a little wider this time. Thank you, I repeated. Daniel leaned back slightly, watching all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not ownership, just recognition. Like he had come here for this moment, not to prove something, but to reveal it. And now that it was out in the open, it couldn't be taken back. The version of me they had known, the quiet one, the weak one, the invisible one, was gone. Not because I had changed, but because they had finally seen the truth. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. Something shifted after that night. Not all at once, not dramatically, but undeniably. It started the next morning. I woke up expecting things to feel the same, to walk into the kitchen and slip back into the quiet rhythm I had known for years. The one where I moved around others, not through them. The one where I filled space without ever being noticed inside it. But when I stepped into the kitchen, David was already there, and he looked up. Not past me, not through me, at me. Morning, he said. Simple, normal, but different. Morning, I replied, pausing for a second longer than usual. He hesitated, then gestured toward the coffee pot. I made some. It's probably not as good as yours. I almost smiled. I'm sure it's fine, I said. But what I noticed wasn't the coffee. It was the effort, the awareness, the fact that he had thought about me at all. Michelle came in a few minutes later, her expression carefully neutral. Daniel called, she said, pouring herself a cup without looking at either of us. He wanted to check in. I nodded. How is he? Recovering, she said. Then after a small pause, she added, he asked about you. That too felt different. Before it would have been said casually, dismissively. Now there was something else behind it, something quieter, something closer to respect. He didn't have to come last night, Michelle continued, or say any of that. No, I said. He didn't. She finally looked at me then, really looked, and for a brief moment I saw it. Not disbelief, not judgment, but uncertainty. Like she was trying to understand something she had never needed to question before. I just didn't know, she admitted. The words were small, but honest. I didn't expect you to, I said gently. That seemed to ease something in her. Not completely, but enough. Jason came in last, dropping his backpack by the door. Grandma? He said immediately, his voice more animated than usual. Did you really carry that guy through a hurricane? David winced slightly. Jason, what Jason said defensively. That's what he said. I looked at him, at the curiosity, the openness, the lack of judgment. Yes, I said. His eyes widened. That's insane. I laughed softly. It felt that way. Were you scared? He asked. The question caught me off guard. Not because it was difficult, but because no one had asked it before. Not during, not after. I thought about it. About the wind, the water, the moment I almost fell, the moment I almost didn't make it. Yes, I said honestly. I was. Jason nodded as if that made it even more real. Did you think you might die? He asked. David stepped in this time. Okay, that's enough. It's all right, I said, stopping him gently. Then I looked back at Jason. Yes. I said again, I did. He processed that quietly. Then he said something that no one else in the room had. But you did it anyway. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. Yeah, I said. Jason smiled slightly. That's pretty brave, he said. Brave. The words settled into me in a way I hadn't expected, because for so long I had heard other words. Careful, quiet, weak, invisible. But not that. Never that. Thank you, I said softly. He shrugged like it was obvious, because to him, it was. David watched that exchange closely, and I could see something shifting in him again. Not just recognition, but reflection. Later that afternoon, he knocked on my door. That too was new. He had never needed to knock before. Come in, I said. He stepped inside slowly, as if unsure of his place in the room. I've been thinking, he said. I sat up slightly. About what? About you, he admitted. That surprised me. In what way? He took a breath, then let it out slowly. I've always thought I was the one taking care of everything he said. That I was the one holding things together. I didn't interrupt. Because this wasn't about correcting him. It was about letting him see. But I realize now, he continued, I never really looked at what you were doing. Not just recently. For years. I tilted my head slightly. What do you mean? He ran a hand through his hair. You were always there, he said, helping, fixing things, supporting everyone. And I just assumed that was easy for you. I let that sit for a moment. Then I asked, was it? He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time, he didn't answer right away. No, he said finally. That was the truth. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just real. I think I got used to it, he added. Used to you being the one who handled things quietly. So I didn't think you were capable of anything else. There it was, the assumption, the limitation, the box he had placed me in. And now, I asked. He met my eyes. Now I think I was wrong, he said. Simple, direct, but it meant everything. I nodded slowly. Thank you for saying that, I replied. He hesitated, then added, I don't know how to fix it. You don't have to fix it, I said gently. You just have to see it. He absorbed that, then nodded. Okay, he said, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Because change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, in conversations, in the quiet realization that something you believed for years was never the full truth. And as David left the room, closing the door softly behind him, I realized something else. This wasn't just about them seeing me differently. It was about me, no longer needing them to, because I already knew who I was. And that was something no one could take away again. The shift didn't stop. It deepened. At first, it was subtle. Small changes in tone and attention in the way conversations unfolded. But over the next few days, it became something else entirely. Something that couldn't be ignored. Daniel came back. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures. Just a quiet phone call one afternoon. He's asking if he can visit again, Michelle said, standing in the kitchen with her phone still in her hand. This time, her voice didn't carry resistance. It carried consideration. I looked up from the table where I had been folding laundry. That's fine, I said. She hesitated, then added, he said he wanted to show you something. That caught my attention. What kind of something? David asked from the doorway. Michelle shook her head. He didn't say. David frowned slightly, but there wasn't the same edge in his reaction anymore. All right, he said after a moment. Let him come. That was new. Not just acceptance, permission, acknowledgement. Daniel arrived that evening. He looked stronger than before, still recovering, but steadier, more grounded. There was something purposeful in the way he carried himself this time. Not just gratitude, intention. Thank you for letting me come back, he said as he stepped inside. David nodded. Yeah, of course. The hesitation was still there, but it wasn't defensive anymore. It was respectful. We all sat down in the living room again, though the atmosphere was different this time. Less tense, more expectant. Daniel didn't waste time. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. He began, his gaze moving between all of us, and about everything that came after. He reached into the bag he had brought with him, pulling out a thin folder. Carefully, he placed it on the table in front of him. This, he said, resting his hand on it, is part of that. David leaned forward slightly. What is it? Daniel opened the folder and slid a few documents across the table. At first, it was just something I did for myself, he explained. A way to keep track of everything I went through after that night. Recovery, work, the decision that night. Recovery, work. The decisio ends I made because I knew I had been given a second chance. Michelle picked up one of the papers, scanning it quickly. Her expression shifted. What is this? She asked. Financial records NS I made because I knew I had been given a second chance. Michelle picked up one of the papers, scanning it quickly. Her expression shifted. "What is this?" she asked. "Financial records," Daniel said calmly. David reached for another sheet, then another. The room grew quiet again, but not with tension, with realization. "These are investments?" David asked slowly. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Michelle looked up, confusion mixing with something else. "This is a lot of money." "It is," Daniel said. David looked between the papers and Daniel. "What does this have to do with my mom?" Daniel's answer was immediate. "Everything." That word settled heavily into the room. "I built my life after that storm," he continued. "But I didn't do it alone. Not really. Every decision I made because I remembered what Cy made. I made because I remembered what he did for me." He looked at me again. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just honestly. "And over time," he added, "I realized something." David frowned slightly. "What?" "That I couldn't just say, 'Thank you,' and walk away." He did for me. He looked at me again. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just honestly. "And over time," he added, "I realized something." David frowned slightly. "What?" "That I couldn't just say thank you and walk away." Michelle crossed her arms slightly. "So, what are you saying?" Daniel took a breath. Then he said it. "I created a fund." The words were simple, but they changed everything. David blinked. "A fund?" "Yes," Daniel said. "For emergency response training, community rescue support, helping people who are willing to do what she did but don't have the resources or support to do it safely." Michelle's eyes widened slightly. And Daniel continued, his voice steady. "I named it after her." Silence. Not just quiet. Complete stillness. What David said almost under his breath. "The Evan Thornton Initiative," Daniel said. "My name. In the room. Not as something small. Not as something overlooked, but as something permanent." I didn't speak, because for a moment I couldn't. "This fund has already helped train over 200 volunteers," Daniel added. "Provided equipment, supported rescue teams during storms." David stared at him, then slowly turned to me. "Mom," he said, but there were no more words after that, because there weren't any that could fully hold what he was realizing. Michelle sat back slightly, her expression no longer guarded, just stunned. "You did all that because there weren't any that could fully hold what he was realizing." Michelle sat back slightly, her expression no longer guarded, just stunned. "You did all that," she said softly to Daniel, but not only to him. Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "She did." That correction mattered, more than anything else. Jason stepped closer again, looking between all of us. "So, Grandma didn't just save one person," he said slowly. Daniel smiled faintly. "No," he said. "She started something bigger than that." The weight of that truth settled into the room. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. David leaned back, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes still on me. "I don't even know who you are anymore," he said. The words could have been hurtful, once, but now they weren't, because this wasn't rejection. It was recognition. "I'm the same person I've always been," I said gently. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I just didn't see it." Michelle looked down at the papers again, then back at me. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. The words were simple, but real. I shouldn't have assumed, she added, trailing off. I didn't need her to finish. I know I said. And I did. Because people don't always see clearly. Not because they don't care, but because they're used to seeing only part of the picture. Daniel closed the folder slowly, leaving the documents on the table. I didn't come here to change your family, he said. That's not my place. He looked at me again. I came because she deserved to be seen, he added. That was it. Not recognition. Not repayment. Just truth. And now that it had been spoken, it couldn't be undone. The version of me they had lived with for years. The quiet one, the overlooked one, the weak one, was gone. Not because I had become someone else, but because they had finally seen who I had always been. And this time, they weren't looking away. The days that followed didn't return to normal. They couldn't, because normal had been built on something incomplete. And now that the truth had surfaced, everything had to adjust around it. It wasn't loud. There were no dramatic declarations or sudden transformations. Instead, it was quiet, consistent, real. It showed up in the way David started asking questions. Not out of doubt, but out of curiosity. So, what made you go that night? He asked one evening as we sat in the living room, the television playing softly in the background. I looked at him. You mean during the hurricane? He nodded. There were warnings, evacuations. Everyone was told to stay inside. That's true, I said. So why didn't you? The question lingered between us, not accusatory, not skeptical, just genuine. I thought about it carefully, not just the event itself, but the feeling behind it. The call came in, I said slowly. Emergency line, someone trapped, alone, no responders available yet. David frowned slightly, and that was enough. Yes. He shook his head, not in disagreement, but in disbelief. I don't think I could do that, he admitted. That's okay, I said gently. He looked at me again. But you did, he said. There was something different in his tone now. Not surprise, recognition? Yes, I said. And this time, I didn't soften it. I didn't explain it away. I just let it exist. Michelle changed too, not as openly as David, but in ways that were just as meaningful. She started including me in small decisions, in conversations that she used to have with David alone. Do you think we should repaint the kitchen? She asked one afternoon, standing beside me while I watered the plants. It was such a simple question, but it carried something more. Choice. Respect. What color were you thinking? I asked. She smiled slightly. I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. That was new. Not because I didn't have opinions before, but because no one had asked for them. We stood there for a few minutes talking about colors, lighting what felt warm, what felt too cold. And for the first time, it felt like I wasn't just part of the house. I was part of the decisions inside it. Jason changed the fastest. Children always do. They don't hold on to old versions of people the way adults do. To him, the shift was simple. He had learned something new about me, and he adjusted. Hey, Grandma, he said one day, dropping his backpack and sitting across from me at the table. Do you think you could teach me? I don't know. Like survival stuff? I blinked, surprised. Survival stuff? Yeah, he said, leaning forward excitedly. Like what to do in emergencies, how to help people, that kind of thing. I smiled. I can try, I said. That would be awesome, he said immediately. And just like that, something new began. Not because I had become someone different, but because they were finally seeing what had always been there. Daniel visited a few more times, not often, not enough to disrupt anything, but enough to stay connected. One afternoon, he asked if I would come with him. Just for a few hours, he said. I want to show you something. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because stepping outside the house with this new version of things still felt unfamiliar. David noticed. You should go, he said. I looked at him surprised. You think so? He nodded. Yeah. I mean, if it matters to him and it matters to you. He trailed off, but the meaning was clear. It matters. I nodded slowly. All right, I said. Daniel drove us across town, not to a hospital, not to a place tied to the storm, but to a community center. It looked ordinary from the outside, simple, unremarkable. But when we walked inside, it wasn't. There were people everywhere. Small groups gathered around tables, others standing near equipment laid out carefully. Medical kits, rescue gear, communication devices. And on one wall, there was a sign. Clear, simple. The Evan Thornton Initiative. I stopped walking. For a moment, everything around me faded. Not the people, not the voices, just the weight of what I was seeing. You didn't have to do this, I said quietly. Daniel stood beside me. I know, he replied. That's not what I mean. I added, my voice softer now. This is bigger than what happened that night. He nodded. That's the point, he said. I looked at the people moving through the space, training, learning, preparing. Every one of them is here because they want to help. Daniel continued, but they didn't know how before. Now they do. I swallowed slowly. And you think that's because of me? He shook his head. I know it is, he said. I didn't respond right away, because this was different. Saving one person in a moment of crisis that I understood. It was immediate, clear, necessary. But this was something that kept going. Something that reached beyond a single moment. Something that would continue, even when I wasn't there. That's a lot to carry, I said quietly. Daniel smiled faintly. You've been carrying more than that for years, he replied. That stopped me, because he was right, not in the way he meant, but in a different way, a quieter one. I had carried things, expectations, silence, being overlooked, being underestimated, and somehow that had felt heavier than this, because this was truth, and truth doesn't weigh the same way. A young woman approached us holding a clipboard. Are you Evan? She asked. I hesitated for just a second, then I nodded. Yes. Her face lit up. It is an honor to meet you, she said. The words were simple, but they didn't feel exaggerated. They felt earned. Thank you, I said. She gestured toward the room. We're starting a training session in a few minutes. Would you like to stay? I looked at Daniel, then back at her, and for the first time, I didn't hesitate because I felt out of place. I hesitated because I was realizing something new. I belonged here, not because someone invited me, but because I had always belonged. Yes, I said. I'd like that. When I came home that evening, something felt different again. Not because anything had changed dramatically while I was gone, but because I had. The house looked the same. The walls, the furniture, the quiet hum of familiar routines. And yet I didn't feel small inside it anymore. Mom David called from the living room as I stepped in. I'm here, I replied. He walked toward me, stopping a little closer than he usually did. How was it? He asked. Simple question, but genuine. I took a moment before answering. It was more than I expected, I said honestly. He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't fully know what I meant. Michelle appeared behind him, her expression softer than usual. Daniel told us about it, she said. The center, the training. I nodded. It's real, I said, all of it. She glanced at David, then back at me. That's incredible, she said quietly. Not exaggerated, not forced, just sincere. I set my bag down slowly. There were people there. I continued, learning how to help others, preparing for situations they might never face, but ready if they do. Jason came down the stairs halfway through my sentence, clearly listening. Like what you did? He asked. I smiled slightly. Yes, I said. He stepped closer, eyes bright. Did they know who you were? The question made me pause, because it mattered more than it should have. Yes, I said, and I met his gaze. They didn't look at me like I was weak, I said. The words hung in the air, not heavy, but meaningful. David looked down for a moment. Michelle shifted slightly, and Jason just nodded. Yeah, he said, because you're not, that simple, that clear. And somehow, that was enough. Dinner that night was quieter than usual. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. David broke the silence first. I've been thinking, he said, setting his fork down. Michelle glanced at him curious. About what? She asked. About everything, he replied. Then he looked at me. I keep replaying things in my head, he continued. Moments where I dismissed you, where I assumed you couldn't handle things, He stopped, exhaling. Where I didn't give you the respect you deserved. I didn't interrupt, because this wasn't something I needed to guide. It was something he needed to say. I thought I was protecting you, he added, but really, I was limiting you. That was the truth, not cruel, but real. I didn't see your strength, he said. I shook my head gently. You saw part of me, I replied. Just not all of me. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, and that part wasn't the full picture. Michelle set her glass down carefully. I think we both did that, she admitted. I looked at her. She didn't look away. I judged you based on what I saw every day, she continued. The quiet routines, the way you didn't speak up, the way you stepped back. She hesitated. I thought that meant something about who you were, she added. And now, I asked softly. She took a breath. Now I think it meant something about what you chose, she said. That surprised me, not because it was wrong, but because it was perceptive. I chose peace, I said. She nodded. But that doesn't mean you didn't have strength, she replied. No, it didn't. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I think it's kind of like he started thinking carefully, like superheroes. David blinked. Superheroes? Jason shrugged. Yeah, they don't always look like superheroes. Sometimes they just look like normal people. I laughed softly. That's one way to put it, I said. But then when something happens, Jason continued. They do things no one expects. He looked at me. And that's what you did. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. Just belief. And that mattered more than anything. Because children don't believe things halfway. They either see it or they don't. And now, he did. Later that night, after dinner, David knocked on my door again. That had become a pattern. A good one. Come in, I said. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I want to ask you something, he said. Okay. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, why didn't you ever correct us? The question was simple, but layered, about what I asked, about everything he said, the way we saw you, the way we talked to you, the assumptions we made. I thought about it, not quickly, carefully, because it wouldn't have mattered, I said. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? If I had told you who I was, I explained it wouldn't have changed what you believed. Not really. He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Because he knew. Deep down, he knew I was right. You had to see it, I added, not just hear it. He sat down, slowly processing that. Daniel made us see it, he said. Yes, I said. And you let him? He added. That was true too. I nodded. I think part of me was ready, I admitted. For what? To stop hiding, I said. The words felt final. Not dramatic, but complete. David leaned back slightly. I'm glad you did, he said. I smiled. So am I. He stood up after a moment, heading toward the door. Then he stopped. Mom, he said. Yes, I'm proud of you. 3 words. Simple. But this time, they weren't empty. They weren't automatic. They were earned, and I felt them. Fully. Thank you, I said softly. When he left, I sat there for a while, letting the silence settle around me. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Because something had changed. Not just in them, but in me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for recognition. Not for validation. Not for permission to exist as I truly was. I had stepped into that already. And now they were finally catching up. Something changed in me after that day at the center. Not in a way that made me louder, not in a way that made me someone new, but in a way that made me fully present. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into the space around me. I was simply standing in it, and that difference, subtle as it seemed, began to shape everything. A week later, Daniel called again. I want to ask you something, he said. His voice was steady, but there was a carefulness to it I hadn't heard before. What is it? I asked. We're expanding the program, he explained. More training sessions, more outreach, more people. I listened quietly. And I don't just want your name attached to it anymore. We're expanding the program, he explained. More training sessions, more outreach, more people. I listened quietly. And I don't just want your name attached to it anymore. He continued. I want your voice there too. That made me pause. My voice? I repeated. Yes, he said. I want you to speak. To the volunteers. To the people who are coming in, not knowing if they're capable of something more. I leaned back slightly in my chair. I don't know if I'm the right person for that, I said honestly. He didn't hesitate. You are, he said. Daniel. You don't have to be perfect, he added gently. You just have to be honest. Honest. That word stayed with me long after the call ended, because honesty wasn't something I had avoided, but it was something I had limited. Not by lying, but by leaving things unsaid. That evening, I brought it up at dinner. Daniel asked me to speak at the center, I said. David looked up immediately. Speak, he asked. I nodded. To the volunteers. Jason's eyes lit up. That's awesome, he said. Michelle tilted her head slightly. "Are you going to do it?" she asked. I hesitated. "I'm not sure," I admitted. David leaned forward slightly. "Why not?" The question was simple, but it carried something more now. Support, not pressure. "I've never done something like that before," I said. Jason frowned. "You went into a hurricane," he said. "I think you can handle talking to people." I laughed softly. "It's not the same," I said. "Maybe not," David said. "But it's still you." That stopped me. Because that was the difference. Not what I had done, but who I was. Michelle nodded slowly. "I think people need to hear from someone like you," she said. "Someone like you. Not someone else. Not someone bigger. Not someone louder. Me." I looked around the table, at the people who had once seen me as fragile, as limited, as small, and now they weren't pushing me away from something. They were in core aging me toward it. I'll think about it, at the people who had once seen me as fragile, as limited, as small, and now they weren't pushing me away from something. They were encouraging me toward it. "I'll think about it," I said. That night I couldn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because I was thinking. About the storm, about the choices I had made, about the silence that had followed, and about the people at that center. The ones who were still trying to figure out if they were capable of more. I had been that person once. Not unsure of my strength, but unsure of whether it mattered. And maybe that was what I could speak to. Not heroism, not bravery, but quiet strength. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that waits. The kind that shows up when it's needed most. The next morning, I called Daniel. "I'll do it," I said. He didn't sound surprised. "Good," he replied. "I knew you would." The day of the talk came faster than I expected. The room was full. Not overwhelmingly so, but enough to make it real. People sat in rows, some with notebooks, others just watching quietly. Waiting. Daniel stood at the front introducing the session. Then he stepped aside and looked at me. I walked up slowly, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving forward. For a moment, I stood there, looking out at them. Different faces, different lives, different stories. But all of them, listening. "I'm Evan Thornton," I said. My voice was steady, clear, not loud, but strong. "I'm not here because I plan to be," I continued. "And I'm not here because I think I'm extraordinary." I paused, because that mattered. "I'm here because one night I made a decision," I said. A decision that didn't feel brave at the time. It just felt necessary. I saw a few heads tilt, people leaning in. "Good. That's something I've learned over time," I continued. "Strength doesn't always feel like strength when you're in it. It feels like responsibility, like pressure, like something you can't ignore." The room was quiet, not distracted, not restless, present. And the truth is, I added, most of us don't think we're capable of something until we have no other choice. I let that settle, because it was true. I didn't go into that storm because I thought I was strong. I said, I went because someone needed help, and I knew I could reach them. I looked around the room again. "That's what this is about," I said. "Not being fearless, not being perfect, just being willing." Silence, but not empty, full, understanding. "You don't need to wait for someone to tell you who you are," I said finally. "Sometimes you find out in the moment you decide to act." I stepped back slightly, not because I was finished, but because I had said what mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder how it sounded or how it was received. I just knew it was real. And that was enough. After I finished speaking, the room stayed quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, the kind that feels full, like everyone was holding on to something they didn't want to lose too quickly. Then slowly, someone started clapping. It was soft at first. Just one person. Then another, and another, until the entire room was filled with it. Not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, real. I stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do with it. Because this wasn't something I had ever imagined. Not recognition, not attention, just being seen. I glanced at Daniel. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. And somehow that was enough. When I stepped down, a few people approached me. Not all at once, not in a rush, just one by one. A young man with nervous eyes. "I didn't think I could do this," he said. "But now I think maybe I can." I smiled at him. "You can?" I said. "You just don't know it yet." A woman a little older than me reached out and touched my hand gently. "Thank you," she said, "for saying what you said. I've spent a long time thinking I wasn't enough." I held her hand for a moment. "You are," I said, because I knew that feeling better than anyone. When I got home that night, the house was quiet, but not the same kind of quiet it used to be. This one felt warm, alive. David was sitting in the living room. He stood up when he saw me. "How was it?" he asked. I smiled slightly. "It went well," I said. He nodded. "I wish I could have been there," he admitted. That surprised me. "You do?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "I think I missed a lot of things about you over the years." His honesty didn't hurt anymore, because now it wasn't dismissive, it was reflective. "You're here now," I said, and that was the truth that mattered. Michelle came out of the kitchen drying her hands. "Daniel called," she said. "He said it was powerful." I exhaled softly. "I just told the truth," I said. She nodded. "Sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do," she replied. Jason came running down the stairs a second later. "Grandma, did you do it?" he asked excitedly. "I did," I said. "Were you nervous?" "A little. But you did it anyway." I smiled. "Yes." He grinned. "Of course you did." That made me laugh, because to him, that was just who I was now. Not surprising, not shocking, just normal. Later that night, I sat alone for a while. Not because I felt alone, but because I wanted to think about everything that had happened. Not just the storm, not just Daniel, but the years before it. The quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones where I had slowly become someone smaller in the eyes of the people around me. And I realized something. I hadn't changed. Not really. I had always been capable, always been strong, always been willing. The difference now was that I wasn't hiding it anymore, and they weren't ignoring it anymore. It had taken a storm to reveal it, but it had taken something else to accept it. Time, truth, and the willingness to see differently. The next morning, something small happened, but it meant everything. David was in the kitchen again. Coffee already made. He handed me a cup. Not out of habit, not out of obligation, but with intention. I made it the way you like it, he said. I took it feeling the warmth in my hands. Thank you, I said. He hesitated for a second, then added, Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. If something like that ever happened again, he said carefully, would you do it? The question was simple, but layered. Would I risk myself again? Would I step into danger again? Would I choose the same path? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't need to rush. Yes, I said finally. He nodded slowly. I figured, he said. Then he looked at me differently, not with confusion, not with surprise, but with understanding. I just hope he added quietly that if that day ever comes, you won't have to do it alone. That caught me off guard, because that wasn't something I had expected. Not concern, not support, but partnership. I met his eyes. You wouldn't let me be alone? I asked. He shook his head. No, he said, and for the first time, I believed him, because now he saw me. Not as someone fragile, not as someone to be protected from everything, but as someone strong enough to stand beside. And that was something we had never had before. As the days passed, life didn't become perfect. There were still moments of adjustment, still things to learn, still habits to unlearn. But the foundation had changed. Respect, understanding, recognition, and something even deeper. Connection. Real connection. Not based on assumption, not based on roles, but based on truth. And that truth had been there all along, waiting for someone to see it, for someone to speak it, for someone to believe it. And now it was finally out in the open, not just for them, but for me. Because the greatest change wasn't how they saw me. It was how I saw myself. And once that changed, everything else followed. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones no one notices. Not because they lack strength, but because they carry it quietly. They show up when needed. They endure without recognition. They give without expectation. And over time, the world can mistake that quiet strength for weakness. But the truth is, strength doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always demand attention. Sometimes it waits. For the right moment. For the right need. For the right choice. In this story, Evan Thornton was never weak. She was simply unseen. And like many people, especially women who spend their lives caring for others, she was defined by what others assumed, not by what she truly was. Until one moment changed everything. But here's the deeper truth. You shouldn't have to wait for a storm to prove your worth. You shouldn't need a dramatic moment to be seen. Your strength already exists in the quiet decisions, in the way you show up every day, in the resilience you carry without applause. So, if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever felt like your strength didn't matter, it does, even if no one sees it yet, because one day, someone will, and more importantly, you will. And when that happens, everything changes. If this story touched you, I'd really love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever had a moment where people finally saw who you truly are? Tell me your story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this. Also, Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. You're not alone, and your strength matters more than you think.